Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer who is passionate about helping all of us to use the adversity in our life to grow, to heal, and ultimately to show up as the best version of ourselves. Aaron Bender, are you in the house today?
In the house, and we're going to get a little heavy with this episode. We have an author on the show, Lilli Correll, talking about trauma, big T, little t, and how to overcome that trauma. You had some when you were a teenager and your brother was killed.
Yes.
How did you, as Lilli puts it, resolve to rise after that? Kind of how long did that take you? Do you feel like it was a conscious decision on your part?
Still pending.
Buffering.
Yeah, buffering. Yeah, still a work in progress. I don't know if there was like an exact day where I'm like, I will rise, but it is very vivid in my mind that, I've talked about this before where my parents, being the amazing parents that they were, they wanted to make sure I was okay and that I would be okay. And so they had me in like multiple different sort of counseling sessions and grief groups. And I do recall being in those grief groups. I was 16 years old. And I do recall that there were certain people in those groups that were still attending like 10, 15 years after the big tragedy had occurred. And me like kind of observing them and going like, wow, like they still seem like they're in that very fresh place. And it almost seemed like the visual that comes to my mind still when I think about it today is like, it felt like they were circling the drain. Like they had never really processed it fully. They hadn't moved on. They hadn't used it in their life to any sort of benefit or value or growth or anything. And I remember noticing other people, maybe not necessarily in the grief groups, but just in life that had suffered from really tragic things and had gone on to do extraordinary things, probably because they had gone through tragedy. And so I don't know the day or the time, and of course it's always a work in progress, but I definitely knew in my mind, I was like, I definitely want to be one of the people that rises from this and that I'm not circling the drain. And hopefully I have lived my life and will continue to live my life trying to rise. We are joined today by Lilli Correll, the author of Resolve to Rise. Become greater than your circumstances. Lilli is also a former healthcare executive, best-selling author, speaker, and a licensed counselor. Lilli, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I really enjoyed reading your book. A lot of it resonated with me, having also gone through some tragic things in my life, as probably most adults have. I mean, there's not too many of us that make it through this life without some sort of suffering or tragedy happening. But tell me a little bit about your story, what led you to start doing this work and what led you to write this book.
I was born in Massachusetts. I will start at the very beginning because it was actually when my sister, who's older, was born that my mom had a psychotic break. And by the time I came, it was like she was wavering between rage and happiness. And so there was no predicting how she was going to be. And I came into the world and I was a bubbly personality and I quickly became her savior. I think my father thought because I was her favorite that, I'm going to be spared from any kind of tragic effects of my mom's violent episodes. But really, I was terrified of my mom. My nervous system was completely dysregulated, and I went into my adulthood thinking I needed to be a savior in my relationships. So what I found is that as I was in corporate America and I was excelling and I was getting promotions, I still felt like I was getting triggered and I was dysregulated. And I've come to realize that usually what I'm experiencing is not very unique. Also, other people experience similar things, and that probably there were a lot of people who had gone through repetitive types of trauma who also felt like they were irreparably damaged. So I wanted to change the narrative from being irreparably damaged to being resilient and able to heal. And that's why really I wrote my book, was just to help people into that journey of healing and discovery, because there's a lot of great approaches out there that can help you reclaim that calm in your nervous system and have your best life.
Yes, I love that. And I'm a divorce and custody lawyer. So one of the things that really stood out to me in your book is your dad is actually the first male to get full custody of kids in that state, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty significant. Okay, so before we dive in to talk about the work and doing the work, I also want to read this excerpt from your book because I think it's really important also. It says, last, I encourage you to take breaks from the work of healing and breathe. Shelve your efforts to rise from time to time and have some fun. And one of the reasons why I tabbed it and I wanted to read that on air is because I think particularly now with so much information, coming at us all the time. I mean, my algorithm on Instagram is like all trauma, healing, relationships, betrayal, healing, personal development. And I know for myself and also like doing this podcast, a lot of the episodes are, well, they're all geared around sort of healing from these things and growing and showing up as the best version of yourself. But sometimes I think we can get fatigued from that. Mm-hmm. We almost kind of get obsessed with it and it's like more information, more books or whatever. And I think it does kind of have this effect, this fatiguing effect. So tell us a little bit more, talk to us about this thing about taking breaks. And then our break will be over and we'll talk about doing the work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, I love what you said about that because fatiguing is such a great word. When you go through repetitive trauma and you're in this hyper arousal, it's exhausting. And you may not even realize that you're in that space. And so you're trying to manage through it by consuming all kinds of content about it and figuring out, is this me? Did I have trauma? Is it that why I have these symptoms? Maybe I'm not crazy. And it's like this constant focus. And while it may be in an effort to get better and to kind of reclaim yourself, it organizes you around the trauma. And it's hard at times, right? To take a break from that. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But being able to step away and say, it's going to be there when I come back. But for right now, I'm going to go play tennis is what I love to do. I'm not thinking about my trauma or having an episode somewhere or doing a reel or whatever. When I'm playing tennis, I'm not thinking about it. I'm getting a break. Yeah. When I'm running, when I am watching anything with Melissa McCarthy in it, I kind of nerd out on her stuff. I think those things, we all have those things that help us to just kind of take some separation from it because it's going to be there. Yeah. And when we come back, we have a little bit more grounding and maybe we're a little more innovative and curious and able to go in new directions than we were before. It actually refreshes our perspective.
A prenuptial agreement, or sometimes called a premarital agreement, is an agreement that two parties enter into before they get married that basically chooses to deviate from state law. It assigns rights and responsibilities regarding assets and debts that are acquired during the marriage. Some common misconceptions about prenups are, one, that they basically doom the marriage to failure, or that it's really planning to divorce, and neither of those things are true. But the real value of a prenup is talking about and creating rules around how the things that you acquire during the marriage are going to be characterized. A prenup can protect things like art collections, real estate portfolios, businesses, all those types of assets. The ideal timeline to get a prenup is not 2 weeks before the wedding. The final version of a prenup has to be presented to the parties 7 days before they actually sign it. So there's like a 7-day waiting period. As soon as you get engaged, you should seek a lawyer's advice and counsel on a prenup and start the process then, because the closer the prenup is signed to the wedding, the more likely that the court is going to think there was some sort of duress involved in that person signing it, and they have to prove that the prenup was signed voluntarily in order for them to be enforced. At Moore Family Law Group, we represent a lot of high-profile people, celebrities, professional athletes, business tycoons. If you already have a lot of assets or you think you're going to be acquiring a lot of assets during your marriage, we are the best ones to protect that for you and help you make your marriage stronger. Call More Family Law Group today.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, I also wonder if it kind of helps you, it helps the process. It's kind of like sleeping, you know, where you think about things all day and you do things all day, but then they say like at night when you're sleeping is actually when your brain kind of like processes stuff and kind of like, you know, like puts it all together and sort of packages it up and like moves you to the next day. I mean, I'm kind of wondering if it almost has that type of effect.
I think absolutely. There is a book called Rest, and if I'm completely transparent, I did not read the whole thing.
Okay.
But I got enough into
Well, because
it.
you started and then you rested.
I was done.
Yeah.
I just was like, oh, this makes so much sense that if you take time to rest, that you show up and you're able to be innovative and creative and you figure things out. Like you said, how many times have you woken up in the middle of the night and you figured something out you couldn't figure out while you were like completely focused on it, trying to get it done?
It's so true. Yeah. What
So
a concept.
absolutely.
Yeah. What a concept that human beings need some rest from time to time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So now sort of switching gears, diving into the work itself. Break time is over. Before we started talking to you, I was talking to Aaron and he was asking me about some of my personal circumstances. My brother was killed in a car accident when I was 16 years old. And he was kind of asking me, you know, how did you decide to rise? Basically, what was, you know, how did that all work? And I know for myself, I don't know. I don't know. But I know that I observed people that did not rise. And I know that I didn't want to be like them. But what do you say to people that maybe are really in the thick of it right now, and that they're just in the deepest pain and they want to rise, but how? What do you say to them? How do they do that?
I was very intentional about how I ordered my chapters. And so if you'll notice, the first chapter is really around like just normalizing, like these are all the experiences people have. But pretty soon after that, I talk about grace. And I think grace, having that foundation of giving first to yourself, respecting that what you're going through is hard, accepting how you're showing up, letting yourself be where you are, having compassion and talking to yourself as kindly as you do to other people, and letting every day be a brand new day. That foundation, I think, is so important because when you start doing that work, it can trigger a lot of shame. And that shame can paralyze you. It can make you decide you're not going to work on it. It can bring up all kinds of stuff for you. So it becomes really important. Or fear. It could be like, I've never dealt with this death that happened in my life, and I kind of like it that way. I don't really want to think about it. That's actually the second symptom of PTSD is avoidance of that traumatic content.
Yeah, I love avoidance, by the way. Love it.
What'd you say?
I said I love avoidance.
Exactly. Who doesn't?
Right.
Yeah. And so having grace as a foundation, being able to say, hey, you know, I'm going to take a moment to just figure out, what do I need right now? What's going on for me that I'm feeling so anxious or upset or like I want to run? And how can I take care of myself in this moment and make space for myself like I would for you? If you called me and you were upset and you were like, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff coming up and I'm so upset and I just don't know what's wrong with me. I should be able to move on. This has been a really long time since it happened. What's my problem? I'm going to be like super compassionate to you. I'm going to tell you, you know, Holly, give yourself a break. Like, this is a lot that you've gone through and you're probably getting it triggered. But what do I say to myself?
Yeah, that is so
Right.
true. Yes. We would never treat anybody the way we treat ourselves.
No. So I think that's really important. And the other thing that I'm harping on right now with clinicians actually is something maybe an evidence-based approach. So like EMDR, right? But you might go in and have an EMDR session and you may feel worse.
Oh.
Don't conclude that, oh, I'm just not fixable. I'm beyond, because a lot of people do. They think I'm unique in my brokenness. I'm just really screwed up. Nobody can help me. But actually, sometimes because of the avoidance that we just talked about, it's too much to deal with that content head on. And there are embodied approaches that you can do. Trauma sensitive yoga. You can do, I love network chiropractics. That's a whole other area. Neurofeedback, where you don't have to talk about the content directly, but you can start to heal your nervous system and be more resourced. So I think that's really important for people to know. Don't think that this clinician's really smart. She was really helpful to my buddy, and so if she's not helpful to me, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the right approach.
Okay. So speaking of approaches, you spent some time as a healthcare executive, and what did you see in the healthcare system that works for people that have experienced trauma, and what did you see that maybe does not work?
I've seen less that works in the healthcare system from that vantage point.
Okay.
What I would see was a lot of individuals who are diagnosed with serious mental illness. And I started to get to where I could recognize that they had PTSD, because they'd have depression and anxiety and ADHD, or they'd have bipolar disorder, or there were certain mixtures, OCD, of diagnoses that would make me say, does this person have this underlying trauma that's never getting addressed? In doing some research, I've found about, the article that I read said 42% of individuals who have serious mental illness who are going through the hospital system actually have PTSD. They meet the criteria. That doesn't mean that the others don't have trauma, but these folks meet the diagnosis. Okay. They said only 2% of those are diagnostically put into their chart. So is it even getting addressed?
Right.
So if I have a dysregulated nervous system, therefore I can't focus. I mean, they're seeing on functional MRIs, right, that there's changes to your brain that cause you to be emotionally dysregulated, hypervigilant, all of those things that explain all of that. It's adaptive, right, to what you went through. It's not because you're defective. It's because you're actually adaptive. Yeah. And so the recovery then should be focused on bringing you back into a calm state within your nervous system. But if I'm not addressing it and I'm just medicating you because you're dysregulated, I'm medicating you for bipolar disorder or anxiety and depression. And I'm not saying that people aren't helped by medications, but if you're never addressing the underlying trauma, that person is going to continue to get triggered and feel like I did. Even though I didn't have serious mental illness, I felt irreparably damaged. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be triggered for the rest of my life.
Right. Okay. So is there anything that the healthcare system is getting right?
I know I'm really hard on it. That's probably because I worked in the healthcare system.
I mean, I appreciate your perspective, and I hate going to the doctor anyway. So
yeah.
So I'm not advocating for the system by any means.
There are providers in the healthcare system that are doing some really awesome things. I'll give you a contrast. So a lot of intensive outpatient providers, so like that one step up where you're going a few hours a day, 3 days a week for programming, usually in group therapy, they're real focused around dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And these folks could be cycling through treatment, not feeling helped. They get to a point where they could teach these classes, right? Yeah. There is a provider that I've run into, and I'm starting to see this a little bit more, where I said they were using cognitive processing therapy, which is like one of the state-of-the-art evidence-based treatment approaches for trauma.
Okay.
But it requires that you deal with your trauma content head on, right? So I said, what do you do when you have somebody who's highly dissociative, who's not ready for that? And she said, we do trauma sensitive yoga. Oh. And that made me really happy.
Okay, tell me what that is. What is
it? Is a yoga that is specifically created to help people basically get connected in their body, doing certain movements and, breathing and just getting present in the moment. If you can become present in the moment and begin to feel safe, then you can start to do the healing. And you already are, right? Because you're starting to feel safe within yourself. What we tend to do when we go through a traumatic event is we kind of evacuate the premises, which is us, right?
Yeah.
And we're just completely disconnected and dissociated.
Right.
And so it just helps people to start to come back into their body. Sometimes that's enough, actually. They don't have to do head on, cognitive processing therapy.
Yeah. I am not familiar with a couple of the different therapies you've mentioned. So, and maybe some of our listeners are not either. So how does the cognitive processing therapy work?
Excuse me. Cognitive processing therapy is really about looking at the way that you're thinking about what happened. What are your cognitions, and starting to kind of process through those cognitions and shift them to healthier ways of looking at things.
Okay.
But it's really looking at it as it came into being through your traumatic experiences.
Okay. And then another one you mentioned that I'm not familiar with, I think it was called dialectic something.
Dialectical behavioral therapy.
What is that?
I really like to think of it as kind of a toolkit of different grounding exercises. I'm oversimplifying, but that's what I like it for, is that you do have all these different tools in your toolkit to think about, how can I take a breath and be present in the moment. Unfortunately, sometimes people are so dysregulated, they're just not in a state of mind to be able to utilize the tools. So it can end up being something where you just feel more ashamed, because it's like, I've learned all these tools, but I can't utilize them, and I'm completely dysregulated. But it's really, really great. There's a lot of different tools that you can utilize.
Okay. How do you know, because like we've all experienced big traumas and little traumas and traumas in between, probably most of us, again, as adults, none of us get out of here without that, it seems. How do you know whether you've actually processed and dealt with and healed from a trauma versus you didn't? You just kind of shoved it under the rug and moved on.
So, about 70% of individuals experience a traumatic event during their lifetime. So I think it's fair to say that you are 100% correct. Most of us are going to have some kind of traumatic event of some sort during our lifetime. Many of those individuals are not going to end up diagnosed or meeting the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder or complex PTSD. So I think that oftentimes what happens is you'll notice that you still haven't worked through it when you're having symptoms of the trauma, like nightmares or flashbacks or memories of it, or you notice a reactivity. I was driving home one day from work, and it was dusk, and I saw a pedestrian get hit by multiple cars.
Oh my God.
It was so traumatic for me.
Yeah.
As you can imagine.
Yeah.
For years after that, if anybody came anywhere near the road, I could be pulling up to a light going almost no speed at all. I would immediately just tense up, and I would get agitated at the person, like, stay.
Right. Yeah.
So I think, we have indicators, things that come up. Maybe we react really strongly to something, like an email about something, or something that really shouldn't be that big of a deal. And we find ourselves freaking out and getting really upset. And I think that's a really great time to be curious and to start to attune to ourselves, figure out, what about this is so upsetting to me? Yeah. That's where we'll find a lot of that information about, I'm afraid this is going to happen. And then we say, well, why am I afraid this is going to happen? And as you dig deeper, you start to get to the crux of what's going on. And I think if you're having that overreactivity, there's probably something you haven't worked through, right? It's typically not, it's that whole kicking the dog, right? Something else happened earlier in the day.
Yeah.
And then you're kicking the dog. If you're noticing that kind of reactivity and stress response pretty regularly, there's a good indication that you've got some stuff to work through, whether it's trauma or it's something else stress related.
Yeah.
It's a good time to be. I one of the trainings I went through, she said, be curious, not furious. So I always think
be
about
curious,
that.
not furious. Okay, that's good. That's very good. Okay, so your book, Resolve to Rise, is, basically like becoming greater than your circumstances. But do you think that rising and achieving and sort of being ultra high functioning can also be maybe a way to disconnect or cope or something like that?
If you're trying to be ultra high achieving, yes. But rising from this standpoint is really about investing in yourself.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. As soon as I said achieving, I was like, she's going to say it's not about like achieving and doing that. It's yes. Okay, so carry on.
Yeah, my friend, okay, I have my book right here.
Yeah.
My friend said, I just read your book, and I always fold the pages when I see something that I like, and I folded the entire thing. She said, you have such a growth mindset. And I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I think that really is just being a forever learner, right? Staying curious. I was diagnosed with MS, so I read like 5 books. I didn't even think I could read 5 books in a month. But I read 5 books because I was wanting to, be curious about like, how does this happen and what can you do about it? And I've stayed a forever learner on the MS journey to say, what should I be eating? How much exercise should I get? What kinds of exercise should I be getting? So when I go in to see the doctor, my neurological exam is perfect and I'm doing really well. I mean, part of that is, thank goodness my disease hasn't progressed. But I also have learned things on the journey that when I eat gluten, I get neurological symptoms and they're real. So I can't do that. So I think if you're in that space of like being a forever learner, then everything is educational, right? So when you fall flat on your face, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm such a failure. I'm a terrible person. Look at me. Here I go again. It's an opportunity to say, how could I have done that differently? Yeah. And just being curious about that and treating stuff as an opportunity for learning, which we don't tend to do, especially if you have complex PTSD. They've actually shown that you have impacts to a part of your brain system called the default mode network, where you actually get swept away in rumination. So you do something wrong and now you've spent the last 3 hours beating yourself up about it.
Yeah.
I'm encouraging people to let's go a new direction and be curious, right, and have a growth mindset. How can I learn from this? What about this is so upsetting to me? Yeah. Or how is beating myself up a protective mechanism?
Right.
I mean, maybe it protects me because if I'm beating myself up and I'm on top of myself, then other people won't see my vulnerability. So it's just starting to understand how those things actually might be protective in some way, and how can you embrace that as a part of your experience and learn from it and move through it.
Okay. So for my last question, I'm a family law attorney, so my clients are, generally going through a divorce, and where I feel like I see this a lot, where maybe they have a hard time rising, they're ruminating for years on end about the divorce. And, certainly it's devastating. Absolutely. No question about that. But there are certain clients that have a really difficult time moving on from it. And it really sort of becomes their identity as time goes on. What would you say to them? What's your best advice to them to rise?
Well, I highly respect the work that you do, first and foremost. I just want to say thank you for being that person, and I'm sure that you are a great support to those folks.
Thank you.
I personally was going through a custody battle for my child. My friends were telling me, I'm really worried about you. I was actually kind of defensive, like, of course I'm not in a good place. This is what's going on.
Yeah.
When I realized I need to do some things that are life-giving, because this is like sucking the joy from my life. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like I was supposed to write a book. So actually, Holly, it was during that period, probably one of the most risky times to publish a book about trauma
Yeah.
that I said, I'm going to step into what I feel like I was put on this earth to do.
Wow.
I think that's important for folks to find the things in your life that are life-giving, because
Yes.
whatever you focus on expands, right? So if you focus on what you want but don't have, then what you want but don't have is going to increase. And so is
Yes.
your unhappiness.
Right.
But if you focus on what you want and what's going well, then more things are going to go well for you. And you're going to feel like the universe is rising to support you in your journey.
Yes, because the universe will conspire to give you what you want if you truly want it and you're taking action. I believe that.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And I fully support that. That is, like, I say that all the time, is you got to get something going on, you know, something meaningful and purposeful in your life. I think that's the best anecdote. And so I'm no expert in this area. You are. So I am so happy that you said that.
Thanks. I can't be more sincere when I say the work that you're doing. It's such hard work. And it is so important to hold space for those folks to maybe help be a shadow, create a leadership shadow to them about showing up for themselves.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's challenging, but it's very rewarding. So I feel lucky to be able to do what I do. And Lilli, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for being on Made for More.
Thank you.
I've got just a little bit more to say. My absolute favorite, most significant, most impactful thing that I heard Lilli say was, if you feel yourself sort of in the depths of your own trauma and your own pain, find the things that are life-giving. I feel so strongly about this, you guys. This is why I'm always talking about stay-at-home moms who are going through custody battles. Like, get a full-time job, find a career, do something that you love, that is your passion, that gives meaning to your life outside of your kids and husband or ex-husband. I'm so passionate about this. And so I love that Lilli said that. And if today you're listening to this and you feel like, I don't know how I can go on, things feel painful, things feel heavy, find what brings you joy, find what brings you meaning, because you were made for more. Woo! I almost lost it! Woo! Okay. Oh God, I was like, I gotta wrap this up! Ah! This show is making me a little oh my gosh! Getting all emotional all the time? What the heck?